We'll start with the guys who are the top 5 PPR, of course, wide receivers. Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones, Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins. I'll ask you the same question I asked you last week. Which one of those do you see potentially falling out of the top 5 this year? I have a feeling I know which one you're going to say.
Well, I could see 2.
Okay.
I mean, Michael Thomas, I mean, boy, if you ever said he'd fall out of the top 5, everyone would come at you. Nuke, I feel like, will remain in the top 5. Julio Jones, I feel like, will remain in the top 5, especially because, they lose those targets with Austin Hooper going to Cleveland. And, Hayden Hurst is going to come in and be a nice sleeper, but I don't know that he's going to command as many targets. Time will tell. I could see Kupp falling out of the top 5. If you looked at what his numbers were last year in terms of his targets and his catches and his yards, once they went to the 12 personnel a little bit more on a regular basis, they declined, and his value sort of was upheld because he kept scoring touchdowns. So I feel like Cooper could end up dropping out of the top 5. This might be blasphemy. As much as I love Chris Godwin, I could see him dropping out of the top 5, not out of the top 10, but out of the top 5. At this point, if I'm looking at my top rankings at the wide receiver position, I've got Thomas, Devontae Adams is going to jump back in, Nuke, Tyreek Hill, and Julio Jones, and then I have Chris Godwin at 6.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Cooper Kupp is probably one of the ones that falls out of the top 5. I think, with the Rams, running multiple tight ends, I think, you see more obviously, Tyler Higbee had a great finish to last season. I think Gerald Everett's going to start to get some more work. I'm curious what happens in this battle between Josh Reynolds and Van Jefferson, who sort of wins out on that and how that impacts Cooper Kupp. But I can definitely see a situation where Kupp sort of falls out. I still think Chris Godwin, I feel like Chris Godwin still is going to be okay just because, look, Tom Brady is not the deep thrower he once was. He is 43 years old, or at least he will be coming up in a couple of months. He'll be 43 years old. And I just wonder whether or not Godwin sort of, I don't want to say fills that Edelman role, but he is that slot guy, and he can be sort of that guy that Brady goes to when things start to break down a little bit. Plus, he has, I think, better yards after the catch potential than Julian Edelman ever did. So I feel like he is still kind of 6. I don't think is ridiculous. I still think he sort of slots in that top 5 myself, but I can understand your argument. So then with those guys out, who do you think jumps back in? You mentioned Devontae Adams, who I think would have been in there last year had he not gotten hurt and missed a handful of games. He probably would have been there. And any other guys you see that could possibly be potential guys in the top 5?
So, Kenny Galladay with a full season of Matt Stafford being the quarterback, he was averaging right around 2 fewer fantasy points when Stafford went down. So if you're getting to 16, 17 points per game, 18 points per game at wide receiver, I mean, you've got a good shot at getting into that top 5. I could see Allen Robinson sneaking up into the top 5. Do we consider Nick Foles an upgrade over Mitch Trubisky? I guess that's the question. I don't know.
Yeah.
So then if that rapport is developed quickly, and that might not happen because of COVID, but time will tell, Allen Robinson could move sort of up into that top 5. And AJ Brown, who I don't have ranked in my top 10, I have him 14th right now.
Right.
If Ryan Tannehill shocks the world and is as efficient as he was in the second half of last season, moving through 2020, AJ Brown could absolutely end up being in the top 5 wide receivers. I just don't see Ryan Tannehill being that efficient and that reliable and consistent again for a 16-game schedule.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is that, if you're talking to AJ Brown, and I know a lot of people have talked about him, understandably, but for that to happen, I think everything has to go absolutely perfectly. Because this is still not a team that's going to throw the ball a ton. I mean, they're still going to hand the ball to Derrick Henry a lot. So I think for AJ Brown to get top 5, it literally has to go picture perfect. By the way, speaking of wide receivers, if you want to feel old, I just saw this come across my Twitter timeline. Wayne Krebet's kid is going to college now.
Is he going to Hofstra?
He is not. He's going to Georgetown.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wait, does Georgetown have football?
That's what I was asking. Like, I don't know if
know.
Georgetown has a football program. I'm not sure. I don't believe so.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's not a football player.
Yeah, maybe he's just going academically, which good for him. So wait, hang on, I'm gonna look. No, Georgetown does have a football team.
They do, yeah.
They do. Okay.
Pretty sure my brother played them. So I'm a terrible brother for not remembering that, but yeah, they do have
Wow.
they do have Georgetown Hoyas football. Yeah, roster.
Yeah, they let's see. I guess they are.
What division?
Is this the Patriot League? Maybe, I don't know. They seem to play some. Yeah, they're in the Patriot League. So I'm looking at their 2020 schedule right now. Right?
Wow, okay.
They play Marist, Dayton,
Marist.
Harvard, Columbia. That's all their non-conference schedule. Then they get into the Patriot League, which is Colgate, Holy Cross, Bucknell, Lafayette, Fordham, and Lehigh. And then they finish. Hey, look, this is just smart scheduling right here. It's late November. You know it's going to be cold and nasty in Washington, D.C. So they schedule a game at San Diego to take on the University of San Diego.
There you go. Yeah,
that's just smart business right there.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, that is smart.
So, all right, I learned something new today. Georgetown has a football program. I did not know that. All right, so that sort of derailed me. But anyway, as we're looking at these wide receivers, I know that this is the time of year that we're sort of hyping everybody, and everybody's kind of getting some attention. Are there guys that somehow, if it's possible, have slipped under the radar to this point in the offseason?
It's so hard to because we're all talking about everybody at this point,
right?
I would say Preston Williams, depending on how he comes back from that injury, he could be someone that is, quote, under the radar. Deontay Johnson, I don't know that he's under the radar.
No, I feel like the last week or so, I've seen a lot of Deontay Johnson talk.
Anthony Miller's another guy who, again, coming off of an injury, but had a nice 4 or 5 game stretch last season, and the quarterback position we would assume is considered upgraded with Nick Foles from Mitchell Trubisky, if that's the way the Bears decide to go in the summer months and heading into the regular season. Marvin Jones, I've been getting him a lot in a couple of best ball leagues and some mock drafts, and Marvin Jones was banged up last season. I believe he played 13 games and he still had 7 touchdowns, and half of the season Matt Stafford wasn't under center. And so I feel like Marvin Jones is one of those nice pickups somewhere you're going to get in the later rounds that, heck, I mean, he's not an old wide receiver. He's proven that he can make an impact in fantasy leagues. So why not take a chance on him late when, you could be looking at, guys like, say, Paris Campbell or Randall Cobb or Alan Lazard at that same, in that same area. I would absolutely take a chance on him. And I think he could end up being a pretty decent draft bargain.
Yeah, I do think Marvin Jones is one that has sort of been overlooked a little bit because, I think we think of the Lions, we talk immediately Galladay.
Yep.
Obviously, we spent a lot of time on that backfield because we're trying to figure out how things kind of split out between DeAndre Swift and Kerryon Johnson there. So I think that's probably one that I think people will. I can see him sitting there in the double-digit rounds and somebody plucks him and ends up getting a pretty quality wide receiver out of the whole deal there. I don't know how to feel about James Washington because we've talked a lot, or we've seen a lot of stuff written and said about Deontay Johnson in the last week or so. And I know that people have really started to pick up on him a little bit. And I just sort of wonder, because remember last year, we were sort of trying to hope that Washington could develop into something. I mean, you remember the whole narrative, like he and Mason Rudolph they were college teammates, I think, and maybe this works out that Mason Rudolph is playing, and it never really happened, I think, the way we wanted it to. But, on some level, I think there's still some talent there. It's just, I think, Fab's a matter of him finding a niche now, right? Because we know that Juju, if he's there and healthy, is going to get a lot of looks. Obviously, Deontay Johnson seems to be the new hotness in this whole thing. They've got to figure out how to get the ball to their running backs, be it James Conner or somebody else. But I still think there's a pathway for James Washington to maybe be at least a boom or bust prospect, maybe a best ball sort of guy. And I feel like he's sort of been overlooked in this whole conversation.
Yeah, no question about that. There's just, in Pittsburgh, you've got, you add in Chase Claypool, you add Eric Ebron, you've already got Juju, you've got a pass catching running back there in James Conner. There's a lot of options there, right? So I like Deontay more than I like James Washington from a fantasy perspective. And Johnson, there was a bunch of stats on him that I researched. I mean, in terms of accurate passes going in his direction, about him having the ability to gain separation from defenders. when your quarterback's nickname is Duck, it's just not good. And when Mason Rudolph is the other option, it's just not good. You bring Roethlisberger back, and suddenly you've got potentially a nice draft bargain. But with that being said, you also have to factor in that Juju is going to end up seeing, hopefully for his sake and for the sake of fantasy owners, well over 100 targets in this offense. And Juju, man, you see, they had the pictures of him, like he's all ripped. He's got the 18 pack going on right now. He's
doing
in good
a DK
shape.
Metcalf right now.
Yeah,
right.
He is. So Juju looks like he's ready, and Ben Roethlisberger looks like he's ready. He shaved that that beard, and he looked like Ben Roethlisberger in those videos that we saw online. So good things for the Steelers offense hopefully are to come in 2020, coming off of what was just a dreadful 2019 season.
Yeah, absolutely. Again though, we've mentioned this. It just feels like so much hinges on Ben staying healthy.
It all hinges on him staying healthy. You're right.
Because if he goes down again, then this thing completely potentially falls apart. I'll also say Anthony Miller as a guy that you mentioned him too, that I feel like we should be talking a little bit more about. But I think, again, the quarterback situation has a lot to do with it. So we'll see how that works. Are there wide receivers that are getting too much love right now? Are there guys that maybe are going a little bit higher than you think they should, that maybe we're reaching for in drafts?
So the first one that comes to mind would be Devontae Parker, but I don't really see people reaching for him. So Parker, had that elusive fifth-year breakout season.
Right.
But it was only really half of the season. And if you look at Ryan Fitzpatrick and the numbers that he was putting up, I mean, it was bananas. So now Fitzpatrick comes in. Now Chan Gailey's the OC there in Miami, and he's got a really good understanding of that offense because he played under Gailey for I think 4 or 5 years. And you also have to factor in though that like Tua Tagovailoa is going to be the quarterback there at some point. We've already heard the Dolphins talk about how, hey, we're not afraid to put him in there if he's healthy. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to Ryan Fitzpatrick. There is going to be a game where he throws 3 or 4 picks, and everyone in South Florida is going to be clamoring for Tua to take over, and he will. So how does that affect Devontae Parker's fantasy value? So I would say if you're drafting Parker as a wide receiver 2 in a 10-team league, I think he could do better. I think he's more of a 3. I mean, I have him ranked 25th at this point. If you're in a 12-team league, you're probably looking at him as a borderline wide receiver 2 or 3. Another player that I'm a little bit concerned about is Jarvis Landry coming off of that hip surgery, right? So Jarvis is Jarvis. He had a really good season comparatively, especially with how people were projecting him because of the addition of Odell Beckham Jr. He ended up being better than Odell Beckham Jr. in fantasy. But I mean, coming off of that surgery, Marcus, that's going to be rough. And then you add in Austin Hooper to an offense that's got a lot of pass catchers, and then Kareem Hunt's going to be there for 16 games you project. So Jarvis, I feel like if you draft him as a 3, I think you're okay, but I can't look at last year's numbers and think, well, he's going to put those numbers up again because, again, maybe a separation in terms of the target share and more options in the passing game for Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I would say one name that has me worried is Mike Evans, and
okay,
I'm too chicken to actually drop him out of my top 10, but I do feel like there's an easy path for him not being a top 10 wide receiver this year. And it sort of goes part and parcel with what I said about Chris Godwin staying in the top 5 is that, part of what made Evans so successful with Jameis Winston is that you just had a quarterback who would stand back there and just rip it and go deep when things broke down. Tom Brady's not going to be that guy. So I think that Evans, who has never really been a big yards after the catch guy, who's been kind of, I don't want to say a deep threat because I think that diminishes what he does, but he's been a big air yards per target guy. And I don't know that that's going to quite be there with Brady at quarterback this year. Then you add to it that they've got a lot of guys that can catch the ball around the goal line, right? I mean, Evans is obviously one of them, but they still have O.J. Howard. They added Gronk. They still have Cameron Brate. They can maybe try to run the football if they get down close because they add Keyshawn Vaughn and that sort of thing. So I just worry that Evans maybe finishes the year outside the top 10. I think he still gets in the top 15 or what have you, but I think for people who are trying to draft him second round, I think there may be some frustration that they don't see coming when it comes to Mike Evans this year. I don't know.
Interesting.
Which guys, and maybe this goes back to the Steelers again, but maybe there's some other guys. Which guys are you looking at that the crystal ball is murky right now, that you're having a hard time sort of projecting what they could be this year?
As a Cowboys fan, I'd say Amari Cooper because of
Mhm.
the addition of CeeDee Lamb. Like, I mean, Cooper, when he was right last year, was a number one wide receiver in fantasy, and there was no question he was tremendous.
Mhm.
But when you add in CeeDee Lamb, a guy who has got sticky hands and was basically, most scouts had him ranked as the number one wide receiver prospect in the 2020 class. And then you also have Michael Gallup, and they're also talking about getting Blake Jarwin a little bit more involved in the offense too, with Jason Witten now in Las Vegas, which is still, again, weird to me. So, like, I mean, I drop Amari out of my top 10. I have him at 12 right now, but he's a player that you could end up seeing somewhat of a decline in terms of his points per game production. What about Keenan Allen too, right?
Yeah.
Keenan Allen been playing Phillip Rivers forever.
Yep.
And now you got Tyrod Taylor. And I like Tyrod Taylor, but he's not Phillip Rivers, and he doesn't have the rapport with Keenan Allen, nor does he have that rapport with anybody right now in Los Angeles' offense. And there's a very good chance that Justin Herbert's going to be quarterbacking games for the LA Chargers.
Mhm.
And I'm not a believer in Justin Herbert. So that also has me a little bit concerned. Like, I have Keenan as a wide receiver too. I definitely dropped him down in terms of my rankings when the Chargers decided to part ways with the YOLO man. And and Keenan is somebody who is a veteran. He's talented. He's going to get the job done. But to what degree? Is there a decline in his stats? And I think there is going to be a decline in his stats in 2020. So hard to project him too, because you don't know, especially with coronavirus going on right now and what's going on in the state of California in terms of like getting guys out in the field and actually practicing. You don't know how quickly or how slowly that rapport is going to be gained with Tyrod and then with Justin Herbert.
Yeah, the Keenan Allen was the name at the top of my list, just because, as you mentioned, that change at quarterback, who, regardless of who it is, and I guess with Tyrod, maybe there's a shorter learning curve just because he's been there and they've had a chance to at least get to know each other a little bit. But I think there's still just a lot of unknown. I will say, I know a lot of people are getting excited about Marquise Brown this year, and I sort of get that, but I just feel like he was way too volatile in terms of his week-to-week performance, and maybe that gets
certainly
a little
was.
better.
Yes.
Maybe that gets a little bit better this year. I don't know, but this is still going to be a very run-heavy team that they'll take their shots downfield. Throw in the fact, though, that they've added Devin Duvernay, who is, I think, an occasional guy who can get some targets there from Lamar Jackson. I like Hollywood's upside. I like where he is when he's at the top of at his peak, but I don't know that I want to ride that roller coaster week in and week out with him. And I don't, I think I want to see him get a little more consistent before I take a shot at him. So that's what I'm looking at. Which guys are you targeting the most in 2020?
Give me all the shares of Deebo Samuel, please. I will take them all. I love Deebo. I love what he did in the second half of last season. He was a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. Emmanuel Sanders is in New Orleans now. Deebo is somebody that I want. I want Terry McLaurin shares also. When you look at last season, started strong, middle of the season sort of struggled with the insertion of Dwayne Haskins into the starting lineup, and then the two sort of picked things up towards the end of the year. And McLaurin, really, I mean, he's going to get all the targets there, dude. I mean, like, what else do they have in terms of pass catching players there? You've got Steven Sims. I mean, there's not a whole heck of a lot. Even their tight end right now is Jeremy Sprinkle or Thaddeus Moss. Like, I love McLaurin as a guy. I'm going to be trying to get a lot of shares of Mecole Hardman because I feel like he's going to take the next step. I get it. His ceiling is shorter because of the talent in the offense, but I feel like he's a better bet to score more fantasy points than Sammy Watkins in 2020.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. I'd add John Brown to that list too. And I know that everybody's going to look and say, well, they have Stephon Diggs, and yeah, I mean, he will definitely siphon off a good number of targets here. But let's not forget, John Brown last year had a career year playing with Josh Allen, and I don't think he just completely fades away from that offense. And you're talking about getting him late as potentially a depth a flex option there. I think with the upside he has, I would like to get as much John Brown on as many rosters as I possibly can. I'm still sort of waving the flag for Christian Kirk. And again, this is more as a depth add. I'm not necessarily drafting Christian Kirk to be a frontline guy that I start each and every week, but I think he sort of has, I know the quarterbacks are different, but he has kind of Will Fuller potential. And, you've got Nuke at one spot, you've got Christian Kirk at the other spot. And I think that, if Kirk can stay healthy and he and Kyler Murray can get together again, I think there's a lot of upside there for him. For a guy that we thought was going to really break out last year, and it was kind of just meh. I do think Christian Kirk can kind of come back and redeem himself a little bit for next season. All right, last thing. Do you have a wide receiver hot take for 2020?
I got a bunch of them, but
Okay.
I don't think Odell Beckham Jr. is going to return to elite status, and a lot of people I feel like are projecting that.
He says he's in the best shape of his life. What are you saying?
Listen, okay. I mean, that's great. But I still have questions about his quarterback. And Cleveland added more weapons in the passing game. I don't know that Kevin Stefanski's offense is going to be conducive to Odell Beckham Jr. putting up 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns, much like he did during his time with the New York Football Giants. So I would be drafting Odell Beckham Jr. as a 2 or a 3 in a 10-team league. And in a 12-team league, you're probably going to have to get him as a wide receiver too. But I really don't think there is a guarantee that he moves back into that top 10, into that elite status. And I think Deebo Samuel could end up being a top 10 wide receiver. Wow. I'm all in on him. I'm sorry. I know he's your guy. You're a Niners fan. You don't.
I don't want you to jinx him. Yeah, right.
I love him. I freaking love him. I am all in. There's 2 guys that I love, like Miles Sanders and Deebo Samuel. I want both of them on all of my teams if I can possibly get. I love what Deebo brings to the table. He is a ridiculously athletic player who just listen. He makes plays, and when you look at the pass catching options in San Francisco, it's George Kittle and it's Deebo Samuel, and Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be looking at those 2 guys a lot. And I feel like Samuel's going to take that next leap into becoming maybe not an elite fantasy receiver, but a damn good one. And I'm all in on him really producing very good numbers.
I did say last year at some point that Deebo Samuel reminded me of kind of a young Anquan Bolden. A guy who catches the ball and it's just really hard to tackle once he has the football in his hands.
Yes.
And I think that was what we saw last year. And that was why I think you saw the Niners really work hard to try to get the football in his hands as much as possible.
I believe I'd have to look it up, but I feel like, I mean, he's one of the top wide receivers in terms of broken tackles. Yeah, he is. He actually, last year, the number of broken tackles among wide receivers, number 1, Cortland Sutton, number 2, Deontay Johnson. Keep that in mind, folks. Number 3, AJ Brown, number 4, Deebo Samuel, baby. He actually tied AJ Brown and Chris Godwin and Cooper Kupp and Nuke with 9 broken tackles last season. So like that's big. That's big.
No doubt. If I have a hot take here, I'm gonna go very specific. I think Mike Williams might end up having more fantasy points than Keenan Allen. And I think a lot of it's going to be the touchdown upside. Allen has never been a huge touchdown guy. I mean, he will get his targets, he'll get his catches. But I think Mike Williams is that guy. And especially if it ends up being Justin Herbert who takes over a quarterback, I think he's going to try to push the ball downfield. And we saw that helped Williams a lot last year. And I think the possibility is there for him to get double-digit touchdowns. And I think, if he can get enough targets, I wouldn't be surprised if he's pushing Keenan Allen in terms of their fantasy scoring this year. So, yeah, it's a hot take.
That is a hot take. It's hot.